I've been thinking a lot about ways to help people get better at World of Warcraft, and we've done the charity stream now, trying to help people in that way. We've been doing the no essence challenges, kind of trying to show, don't tell people on that front, and people still just refuse to do it. I'm not really sure why. I think it's just a psychology thing, but after thinking about this and talking about it so much with Cop, who is genuinely, at least expressing interest in trying to get better every day, I remember that I did some videos early on in this channel's history and the previous channel as well that were pretty much, the infancy of this thought process now. And it's kind of funny looking back because these are not that old. So I didn't really know what to expect when I watched, when I thought about these videos again. I forgot this has 111K views, so it got a lot of penetrated the market. Let's put it that way. But let's take a look at it today. We're gonna take a jaunt through memory lane here, see what I thought in the past, and give my updated opinions on it today. Because I'm really, what I have to say, man. The older I get, the more I just get less and less tolerable of inaction towards success, man. When people say like, oh, the things are too hard or blah, 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 I can't do this, I can't do that. No, you can. You're just not pursuing a methodology that's going to help you achieve your goal. That's it. It's a fact. Unless you're talking about, I can't jump from one building to the next. You know what I mean? Okay, well, some physical impossibility, then I guess you're right. But that's not the case. You know what I mean? People are talking about playing a video game. I think anybody can do this. Honestly, I do. I knew a guy who had one hand, and he played this game better than I did. So that's always kind of inspired me. But anyway, let's take a look at this. We're going to hear, I'm going to cut through some of it. We're going to go through some of my my favorite parts. There's 13 tips given in this. We're going to grade them on accuracy. Let's put it that way. So let's get started. One tip I'm going to give right now is elevation. Beyond all of that, it's not relevant to any of those categories because it's something that's inherent in the game. And it is, so this first tip here, okay? Healers and tanks need to be maxing their DPS. Now, how about this? Because this is funny. This is coming from a day. So this was recorded during WoD, but it was right on the eve of Legion. Like this, the footage that I'm showing here is from like the early part of WoD, like probably the first few months of WoD. WoD was pretty short anyway. But anyway, and then, Legion was on the beta. We had already recorded a ton of stuff on the Legion beta by the time this video was published. July 15th, this actually was published. And I think that the beta, the alpha started in March, I think. So yeah, we had already spent a lot of time on the alpha. And the number one reason that I made this like kind of like tip zero was because I had already gotten the wind, the gist of healers getting big DPS buffs and not using them. Now, it was already a thing in WoD CMs and mob CMs with Druid because they had Heart of the Wild, which was a talent that allowed you, I think it was like 200% more DPS for 30 seconds. It was a really, really big CD. But it was at the cost of healing, like a dramatic amount, because you'd spend all your DPS globals. So, but these were different days. If you never did challenge modes, I'll talk about that as we go. But still, I think this is really a good start. Really a good start to the video here, that I'm actually encouraging healers and tanks to do damage. Now, flash forward to today, you'll see the damage versus healing thing, especially for the tank too. The defense versus offense thing is a much more divisive. It's not like it used to be. In WoD, to maximize your Death Knight, you just use spells that also maximize your offense and defense at the same time, basically. So it's a little bit different now. You know what I mean? Like trinkets and gear and stuff is a lot bigger deal than it was in WoD challenge modes. Let's put it that way, for Death Knight at least. So it's a bit different. You might not see me practice what I preach in this way because I want to make sure that I'm maximizing my healing. Because I believe that if I'm like 100% can solo the dungeon without a healer, then the healer could maximize their play so much more, and that's just more important. But it's good that we started with this. Let's put it that way. All right. A lot of people seem to be confused on this. I've made a lot of videos on this. But tanks have, for a long time, been able to carry the DPS. Even in challenge modes now, I find myself regularly doing more AoE than any other player in the group, even on good groups. And as now a healer can do in Legion, they can do a lot of damage. All right, so the tank and the healer need to be able to maximize their damage. In a lot of ways, that involves the tank maximizing their healing as well. And then, of course, the healer spending globals wisely. So people have said that's related. They've done this in Final Fantasy 14. I've not played the game. Right. A lot of at the point, a lot of people were saying that this was like they're copying Final Fantasy 14. I'm like, dude, healers have always been able to do damage. In fact, at the time on Nostalrius, like holy priests were one of like the best dungeon damage dealers because they could do like a ton of damage with Holy Nova. It was like they did more damage than actual damage dealers in Classic, and I was like, what the hell are these people talking about? This is not. This has always been a thing in the game. It's so bizarre. But I guess if you're already in that mindset, then that's good, because that is definitely one tip that I can give you that is definitely mandatory for 5-man progression. So we'll get right into it with the beginner tips. I have 4 for each category. So number 4. Yeah, so what I did was here, I tried to kind of break them down by like almost like this was like an early tier list, right? It was like tier 1, number 1 kind of thing. And the early ones are just like what I believe to be super general. But looking back at this, I actually think I got them backwards. I mean, the top ones are good. They're very specific, but they're not the best tips. So it's actually, yeah, let's go through it. I mean, be coordinated. What for beginner tips is coordination is king, especially of interrupts and things like external CDs or that type of utility. Yeah, so why I'm talking about this is because I did a lot of Mythic Plus, or a lot of challenge modes at the time, and people would give me, this was very, very, very common because the CDs used to have much shorter CDs. They would give me Iron Bark or Pain Suppression at the worst time. I'm talking about like, literally, I'm not even taking damage. Now, Blood DK was very different back then. It's not like it is now, where it's like ultra spiky. If you say in WoD, actually, I have runes. I have you have the plague still. You put 2 different diseases up, and then you spread them. It was very, 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 very different. There was really, it was more like kind of like a regular warrior tank or something like that. Now, they didn't really have these moments of huge vulnerability. And you didn't really, like, your healing was mostly through whatever, the absorb. Most of your healing was going to be absorbing. So putting Iron Bark on the pull was actually a terrible idea. It was a terrible, terrible idea because it would just negate 0 damage. I'd have a massive shield on me. I would never take any damage. It would just waste my own healing. So it's complete opposite now, but that was the main reason we were talking about it, because I was really sick of people giving me CDs that I literally wasn't using. And more so, this was before like widespread like interrupt trackers were happening. You know what I mean? Things were different back then. I didn't actually know how to track CDs and stuff like that. So things are different. Very important, guys. A lot of people don't understand that, but it is very paramount to completing dungeons properly. The number 3 is going to be understand how to AoE as your class and spec. Now this is honestly hilarious that this is even has to be on a list, because if you flash forward to today, it's the other way around. People don't know how to do single target. So this one hasn't held up well, but the reason I'm saying it in this video is because there was times where, you know, basically this happened all the time in my guild. We raided, and you know, we used to be a lot more successful than we are now, but we had some serious players and they would crush it in raid, and I'd do challenge modes with them and they were abysmal. Like they couldn't understand that like you had to do certain things to maximize your AoE. So this video is almost made in response to those people, kind of an early a progenitor to what we're having now, but in the opposite direction. Like I cannot. It's very frustrating, even especially on a fortified week, but even more so on a tyrannical week, when you crush, like everybody uses all their CDs on easy trash, and then you come to a hard boss. Now, things were very different in WoD. The challenge mode model, there was no fortified tyrannical, nothing like that. It was a whole different game. And the bosses were just really, really, really easy. In fact, I have another follow-up video to this, which I'll have linked down below, hopefully, and it shows just how easy the bosses were. I'm talking about like 1-minute bosses where the trash would take over, you know, longer than that. So it was definitely a different game. And back then, it was all about your clear speed on AoE, because if you didn't do good AoE, you were never going to upgrade the timer. There was no there wasn't as much leniency now. Like basically, to just upgrade a key now would be like getting a bronze in challenge mode. So now imagine if like in order to succeed in a challenge in a Mythic Plus, you had to triple upgrade everything you did. Think about how that would change the game, right? That would be what gold equivalent was back then. And obviously the tuning is different now, but you would have to basically do insane things. It would basically just be about, can you pull 6-packs together and AoE them down fast enough before everybody dies. So that's kind of how the game's changed.
A lot of people only do raids, serious raiders or even just LFR people. Most of your challenge is coming from a raid boss, so you never actually learn.
Yeah, so like I was saying, like nowadays in BFA, the bosses are way, way harder than, like there's trash that's difficult, obviously, but it makes a big difference when you have good single target and good AoE. It's not like it used to be. So, but either way, I mean, it still stands to reason. If you've only ever done raiding and you're coming into Mythic Plus for the first time, you have to understand that you're not only worried about single target damage. You know what I mean? There's a lot more. It's kind of a circular point there, but it is very true.
You're going to struggle in dungeons. And number 2 is dungeons are long, so you should be using your CDs as much as possible.
See, that's kind of going back to the third one there, where it's like the same thing. Like I had people who were they didn't seem to understand that the bosses were just easier than the trash, so they'd be saving there'd be like a 4-minute stretch and they'd be saving their 2-minute CD. It's like no, you could have used it on the trash and on the boss. You understand? And CDs were also different back then. People had a lot more CDs. But they probably weren't as powerful as they are today. I don't really remember exactly what CDs were in the game for what classes. Obviously for Death Knight, you can see though we have a big defensive CD and Rune Tap, which is now a talent, but back then it didn't actually use a rune, so it was just extremely powerful. But for in terms of offense, all I had was literally just, I didn't even have anything. Rune Weapon basically wasn't an offensive CD. I had Empowered Rune Weapon, which is now a frost only spell. But yeah, those two things together would help. There was no Bone Storm or anything like that, so things were different for a lot of classes, but either way, it was still the same principle. Like, don't sit on your CDs. And I say this all the time with tanking, because people constantly, they ask, like, how can I get better at tanking? It's the same thing. It's not just for offense. It's like you're sitting on CDs that you could have used 2 or 3 times by now. There's no reason to save them. You know what I mean? Absolutely no reason to save them. Use your CDs. At the 30-plus minute dungeon, don't just sit on them. You're going to use them and maximize your time.
I think a lot of people don't really think about. But the number 1 tip for beginners coming into challenging dungeon content in Legion is that you need to be looking into different talents or even a spec to play maximally. A lot of people don't do this. All right, I've run dungeons with a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm a raider. Look at me. I'm 13 to 13 Mythic. I can do exactly what I do in raids in dungeons. And that is not true.
Oh, hold on. I think a
great example is an Arcane Mage, right? Like, Arcane Mage is insane. I mean, there's no question that they are the best damage dealing spec in Warlords of Draenor, right? But if you brought them into a 5-man, they would be pretty shit.
Now, it's funny because this is, again, a very targeted comment. I know exactly who I'm talking about in this video looking back. But, Arcane Mage was just broken. If you didn't play WoD, you didn't see Hellfire Citadel, go do yourself a favor. Go look through Hellfire Citadel logs. It's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. There's a group out there that I think they did the first boss with 1 tank, no healers, and 19 Arcane Mages. It was the most broken any spec has ever been. But it was god-awful for 5-mans because it was only about burst. That's all they did. It's basically like Fire is now, only notched up to 11. Like, they literally did no damage outside of CDs, and they're all standstill DPS. Like, they cannot do any AoE, any movement, any type of, nothing else. So people would come into CMs with Arcane. And don't forget, in challenge modes, you got scaled down. So all that overpowered stuff that worked well in raids didn't work anywhere near as well in 5-mans. So you'd see like an Arcane Mage do like 30k on a boss in 5-mans, which again, in challenge modes, you got scaled down. So even though people were doing like hundreds of K on raid bosses, you got scaled down to like pre-raid levels, like pre-first tier raid levels. So yeah, like doing 30k was excellent. You'd see people do like 30k on bosses and then like 5k on AoE. Like they basically didn't AoE. Arcane literally didn't even have AoE at the time. They would just single target a target down and that would be it. So this is a very important thing back then. It's not another one that just doesn't hold up well. It just doesn't really work that way anymore. Every class is a lot better designed. And, people always credit older expansions for having better class design, but I don't know what the hell they're talking about. I really don't, because I think they missed some of these moments where it's like if you wanted to play Arcane, you physically could not in 5-mans. You would be almost useless. And this was back in the day when Fire and Frost and Arcane were so so different, so unbelievably different. You couldn't even look at them the same way. Like, it's not like it is now where it's like, oh, I'm a fire mage. That's who I am. I'm going to maximize offense in multiple ways. I'm going to do things differently. Maybe there's some perks about playing fire, but I like it, so I'm playing it. In the day back then, it was like, oh, you're a mage. You got to play arcane for this fight, frost for this fight, fire for this fight. That was how you maximize the class. And some people still do that. Like, it's probably a bigger deal with like maybe warlock. They have a lot of difference in the 3 specs, but it's not really like that now. If you play a fire mage, there's ways to maximize your trash damage. There's ways to maximize your boss damage, and they're gonna both matter. Whereas back in WoD, it was the opposite, honestly. So, yeah, let's keep moving here. We're going to go to the next step here, which is the tier 2 kind of thing. Let's see what we have to say here.
We've talked about these are 4 intermediate tips. Number 4 being elevate the pace of the dungeon at all times. All right, this should be something that all 5 players are looking to do. The tank especially, you should always be looking to pull as large and convenient as possible. Without the rampant use of things like gore fiends, it's a little bit more difficult in Legion, but of course blood does still have it. It's just
now it's funny I bring this up because back in WoD challenge modes, gore fiend was like you couldn't, if you didn't have a death knight, you couldn't even do most of the times the way they did them because there was so many casters. It was really odd. There was like 4 or 5 dungeons in WoD that had like 90% casters, or more so just range. There were a lot of shooters, like they had guns and bows and stuff. So there was no way to pull big. Like I'm not really sure what people do now that nobody uses blood DK. They just don't worry about it. Oh, it's snapping. I guess they snap now, which is ironic. But back in the day, if you wanted to gather like 2-3 different packs that are all in different areas, you had no option but Gore Fiends. And Gore Fiends was a 40-yard range back then. Now I think it's only a 30. I'm not exactly sure of the yardage, but it was nerfed dramatically. I actually bring that up in this video. But still, even in Legion, it was important. And I don't think a lot of people understand what I meant about elevate the pace. And frankly, this is a bad video, so I'm not sure how I thought they were going to get it. But what I mean is you're constantly like looking to get better, faster every time you do the run. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily like in the run that you're trying to elevate the pace, because that's not a good thing. You don't want to just be chain pulling at times. That's really bad. And we're going to talk about things that obviously are contrary to what it sounds like I'm talking about here in the video. But yeah, what I mean to say is that every time you do this dungeon, you're looking to get slightly better at it. You know what I mean? You're looking to get more knowledgeable, know where you're using your CDs better, and improving every time you go out. That's what I'm trying to get at, because it's very important that every time you do this, you get a little bit better. Because if you don't, like, you know, if you just think like, oh, I'm going to do the exact same thing every time, it's not. Eventually, you're going to fail. You know what I mean? And you're not going to know why. So, you know, that's something that's really important. If you guys are a new player, just go into the dungeon thinking, all right, what could I do better this time? That'd be your main thing.
That's a good tip for healers too, specifically. Now, number 3 on this list is uptime. If you don't know what that means, what I'm talking about is being able to do damage very often. All right, for 100% of the time the boss or the mob you're fighting is engaged.
That's a good point.
So that is, and by the transference property, tells you that mobility and movement speed is actually a DPS increase in 5 minutes. A lot of people don't understand that. In fact, I did challenge modes very recently with people who were, I was counting down, I'm 3, 2, 1, pull, pre-pot, etc. And they're back, they're like 10 yards away from the boss. It's like, what are you guys doing? You know, this is a DPS loss, right? You have to be as close to the mobs as possible. So when you enter combat, the first, you know, you're wasting seconds of damage there.
So somebody argued with me on this video, actually, now that I remember this, about what DPS is and isn't. And what I'm trying to get at here is that having higher uptime is always a DPS gain. But what I said was, if you don't start the pull on global 0, then you're losing DPS. What you're really losing is damage, because it's DPS is just an average of the damage you did over uptime, you know, divided by uptime. So it's not necessarily a fact, but it still should be looked at like a fact. Because if everybody is in combat, like if the boss is going to last, you know, X seconds, and you're only in combat for X minus 7 seconds because you're off, you're not ready to pull when the pull starts, then you are losing damage. You know what I mean? Like you've made the boss take longer. You've done less of an effective job. So That's a really, I mean, now, this is still one of the most important things you can do. You have to be ready to pull. And a tank's job is to tell the group when they're pulling sometimes. You know what I mean? This happens all the time in Mythic Plus, dude, where one DPS decides he's going to pull and the other two are like, oh, we're going? You know what I mean? Like, it's not good for anybody. If you're the tank, you have to set the pace on this. You can't let the freaking stupid-ass fire mage pull the boss for you, because it's going to disrupt potion usage, which people just don't use. It's going to disrupt CD usage, which people just don't use. It's going to disrupt bloodlust, which that fire mage is probably not using. But like in an ideal world, everything would happen the exact moment you wanted it to. And that starts with pulling the boss. As stupid, as rudimentary as that sounds, it's actually the most important thing. I can't stress it enough. Like there's been raid fights where we've had to like, let's put it this way. I'll never forget this fight. Major Domo in the Firelands, not MC, of course, Firelands. The boss's enrage timer was so freaking tight that we had to like start as close to the boss as humanly possible, because if we didn't, like those one or two like globals of him moving towards the damage dealers and the tanks would be enough to make the, because like, you know, there's timers on fights, like they're based on real time. It's based on 60 seconds of real time. So if somebody engages the boss, but 2 or 3 seconds go by before you start your rotation, you've now just nerfed your DPS. Like that, you know what I mean? That's really important. I don't think people understand that now. You know what I mean? Like the fights are different than they were back in the day. But if you could like basically front load all your damage in a 5-man, so you kill the boss 30 seconds faster, the boss is just going to get that much easier. You're going to skip mechanics. You're going to skip danger. The healer's going to have to heal less. So not being ready to pull is the biggest sin you can make. It really is. And you don't really see it as often. It used to be a big deal back in challenge modes because people's manas and, you know, priorities and stuff like that were not where they needed to be. But all right, let's listen to this one. This one's a good one.
Now, number 2 on this one here is you need to learn to use your utility properly and be vocal with it as well. We already talked about coordination, but this goes one step even further. All right, now I'm talking about things like leg sweep. All right, a very strong AoE stun needs to be used properly.
Ironic, because at the time WoD challenge mode's leg sweep dominated. I believe it was a 5-second AoE stun. I'm not exactly sure. I bring this up and people refute it. I don't remember. Maybe you could check it on Wowhead or something probably, but yeah, let's put it this way. It was the strongest spell in the game because there was other stuns in the game back then. You know, like Cap Totem still was there, and Remorseless Winter was there. It was a AoE stun, but it had a ramp up time. It's kind of the opposite of Cap Totem. But Leg Sweep was just, you use it and everything gets stunned. So it was really easy to interrupt multiple mobs at once and keep them locked down to the point where, like, surviving in challenge modes was different than it is in BFA. Like, to survive, you needed coverage. You could not do it alone at times. Like, you would pull 5-6 packs at once and Gorfiends them together. And if you got no help, if you didn't get stuns, if you didn't use things like Army, if you didn't get externals, if you didn't have big CDs, you just get one shot, literally. You just literally get one shot. I mean, it's not normal. That's not how you're supposed to pull it. But you need to do that to maximize time. So things are very different now. I would never recommend something like that in BFA because the nature of challenge modes was that you could try again. You can't. That's my biggest issue with Mythic Plus is there's no trying again, and this is obviously it makes the lever situation much, much worse. And that's why nobody ever left challenge modes, because it was like, okay, are we gonna try again? No, all right, I'm just gonna leave then, no problem. But yeah, all right, we'll just try again then. You know what I mean? In Mythic Plus, it's like, well, we can't try again, so I'm just gonna go get carried by some other group. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's a really big deal, though, I have to say. And I think these intermediate tips are the best ones because it stands up now. This is a very interesting pack as well, by the way. I want to kind of show this pack off. This is a pack that you could learn something from. So as you see here, what we're doing, this mob is gonna. You see the mob in the big ogre. He's patrolling to the left. Here, let's just play it.
Usage and coordinative use of the ability. So you need to be saying things like that, talking about this. A lot of people will try to use these as like fast as possible, like if it's a raid, but that is not what you got to do in 5-mans, guys. Talking about now also things like Dark Sim and Reflect from Hunters and Shaman in the WOD challenge modes. Those things are removed in Legion, guys, 100% removed. But I can guarantee you that as the game progresses, there is going to be something like that. Probably not exactly like that, but something a class can do.
Why it's so interesting is because this is an extremely dangerous pack. These mobs do like the worst combination of things that existed back in the day together. You can kind of see with Healbot down there and on the screen. I have like 5 stacks of an armor debuff. If I had 5 stacks of an armor debuff in BFA, I would probably just get one shot on my DK. So that really tells you everything you need to know about Death Knight. Even with this crazy pull, I'm actually pretty good. The reason it's crazy, in challenge mode, like everything was meticulously planned out. So I knew exactly where I was going to use army, exactly where I was going to use dancing wind weapon, etc. Now it's different, obviously, because the timer is so based on the affixes in the group. But back then, like if you had your CDs up for a pack, you knew it was going to be an easy pack. This pack is a problem because I don't have CDs up for it. I can't use them here, there, and another place. So I have to pick and choose. So this is the hardest pack in the dungeon because there's no CD coverage for me, and I basically just have to get spam healed with that armor debuff. But what actually was interesting about this was, let's see if you can see this happen.
Removed, but I can guarantee you that as the game...
Look at this. Yes, so that mob charged. See the mob at the bottom of the screen? He charged behind me. It's got a fear. Okay, this is great. This is so good looking back at this. The mob charged behind me for some reason. Maybe there's a person over there. And the mob is now trying to cast a fear. I need to interrupt this. This is so important. If I don't interrupt this, I'm probably going to die on most keys, on most dungeons. This healer just kept me up, I guess. Also, you'll notice the healer does 0 damage in this run. We'll talk about that. But, yeah, I need to interrupt. And look, I'm trying to interrupt. The mob is behind me. How about this? This is a bit very unique. Some of this stuff is fascinating to look back at.
It's going to be something like that. Probably not exactly like that, but something a class can do that is very specific to them, that if you do it at the wrong time, you're really going to lose a lot of efficacy. And the reason I'm talking about efficacy is because, for example, we did Iron Docks, and the second boss in there, right, the group of the 3 dude, the orcs and the goblin, that second, the big guy, Okrag or something like that, you can reflect his firewall. And because, people, like, they both try to do it and both missed it or something like that, well, we just lost like a minute there, guys. You know what I mean? That's a very bad thing. People don't seem...
So what I'm actually talking about here is interesting because it's probably like a fallacy, like a psychological principle or whatever. But it's like the opportunity cost was lost. You understand? Like, so what I was describing there, if you guys never did WOD challenge modes or never seen them done, basically there was like 4 different abilities in the game that reflected damage, and they would reflect like, because challenge mode was scaled down, so it would like reflect like 50% of the boss's health with some abilities. Like, I'm not even joking. There was some bosses that I could literally solo as a Blood Death Knight. Dark Simulacrum was one of these 4. And if I used it properly, I could put it on the boss and it would just one shot. Like, legitimately, it would be maybe a dot. It would take a while, but it would do like 70+% of the boss's health with that one ability. So, what I'm describing here is the one in Iron Docks was incredibly important, but very difficult to do, because it was a wave and you had to run through the wave, and if you missed, that's GG. You now have to fight the boss properly. So even though we had 2 different people who could do it, I remember this run. We had 2 different people who could do it, and both of them said they were going to get it, and neither of them got it. Like, they both kind of just like, I guess the other guy's going to get it, actually. And neither of them got it. And they're like, dude, it's just a mistake. It was a pretty, like, heated discussion. They're like, it's just an error, dude. I'm like, dude, now we have to fight the boss. Nobody knows how to fight the boss. Like, it would be like if you did, like, what would be, like, one of the hardest bosses mechanically in BFA. Imagine if you could just one-shot that boss. Just think of whatever the hardest boss is mechanically in BFA, and you can just, like, basically one-shot it. You can cheese it, so it just dies in, like, 10 seconds, right? And then now all of a sudden, you failed that cheese, and you have to do the boss properly. Nobody's going to know what they're doing. They're going to have no idea. You know what I mean? So that type of error is not something you could afford to make in a timed run. You really can't. It's almost like a morale boost to do it, and a morale, like, it's going to flounder. The group's going to flounder if you fail it. So these things are more important in pugging than anything, and I'm kind of leading to this which is funny because I didn't really, I did Pugging, but it's not like Pugging is now, where you have all these different dynamics of the group. It's funny because this is almost prophetic looking at this. Like, I was thinking about this before it even happened. But yeah, like that type of morale, like nailing that key play is more important than anything. Because if you fail it, not only did you lose time, but you're gonna the opportunity cost is gonna be greater. Yeah, I don't know how best to put it, but anyway, that's a really good. The middle stuff was excellent. I really like what I put here. And this one, let's see what I say.
Anyway, the number one on this list here, okay? This is like the biggest tip I can give to any entry-level dungeoner. Pre-pot every opportunity, all right? If you don't know what pre-pot means, what I'm talking about is using a potion before combat. You would do that because it does not incur the large...
Now, hopefully everybody knows this, but pre-potting is like the number one most important thing that ever happened in WoD challenge modes. The potions were absurd. I'm talking about because they were meant for raiding, right? Like they were powerful in raids, but in 5-mans you were scaled down. Your gear was scaled down, but your stats were not. So a pot was like a 50% DPS increase. Now that's not really translated very well to BFA, but it's still like, if I use those potions well, they do like 20% of my damage at times. So it's very important now, and people just don't do it because they're a lot more expensive and things are a lot easier until you're doing like 20s and stuff. The timer's a lot more lenient now, like I was saying, but still managing your potions, and it's not just DPS potions, it's also things like speed pot and healing pot. Using your potions well was the most important thing you could ever do back then. So it hasn't aged very well, but it's still very, very important. Like if I went through an entire dungeon without ever using a potion, that would be a huge DPS loss, like a massive DPS loss. The difference was back in the day, you used an armor potion. Armor used to increase your offense and your defense. So there's no slam dunk pot like that anymore, I don't think. I mean, I guess the strength potion, those strength potions are just garbage, but that would be the closest thing where it would be improving my offense and my defense, but it's not anywhere near. Basically, it was a massive defense boost and a massive offense boost. Now it would be just a minor offensive boost with a terrible defensive boost. But yeah, an item like that, man, I definitely, maybe a versatility pot. That would be kind of the equivalent.
Basically, when you use a potion in combat, you're not allowed to use a second potion.
I hope everybody knows this. If for some reason people don't know what pre-potting is, what it is when you're in combat, you cannot use a second potion in that combat window. So you would pot when you're out of combat, and it would last into the combat window. If people don't know that, oh, you should watch this video. You should watch this because, yeah, that's a very important thing. And I guarantee a lot of people in Mythic Plus, they don't do this because I've done keys where it's like, man, there's no way this guy's doing that little damage. It's hard to believe. And I don't know how important it is now, but, when you see those mages and people doing like over 100K on bosses, you think like, I have to assume the potion is a big part of that. Maybe it's not anymore. I don't really know. But I think that's kind of the, and consumables have gotten less and less important over time, but 5-mans, you don't use consumables in 5-mans, it's going to show.
Already have taken on all of my advice and feel that they know a good amount about how to play the game in general, and now are ready for very specific dungeon, challenging dungeon specific tips. Number 4 on this list, guys, is going to be learn the...
So this one's definitely the worst. This is the worst tip I gave in the whole freaking video. But what I'm talking about now, this is like tier 1, right? This is like, okay, you've you know how to do dungeons. Now it's time to get really good at specific dungeons. So what I'm talking about here is like in challenge modes, there was no count. There was mob, enemy forces, I think is what it was called, right? Like you needed 65 mobs killed out of the dungeon. So it's very different than it is now, where it's like you can kill mobs that are worth like 0.1% and then mobs that are worth 2%. You know what I mean? Back in the day, you just wanted to pull as little trash as possible with getting 65. It didn't matter what you pulled. So there was a lot of things that you could do that you would be able to skip huge swaths of trash. That was just universally beneficial. It doesn't really work that way anymore. And if you did, you would just use rogues. But in the old days, there was walls that you could break. I wish I had footage of this, but you can probably look it up, but you can find it out there. Shadow Moon Burial Ground. There were these it was kind of like a maze. Like you had to run to the right and then down and then to the left and then down and then to the right and then down. That's how you got to the boss, right? But it was like this wall. It was like a pyramid. at the top of the pyramid, if you put a freaking toy, it was like the Dark Moon, like the seesaw thing, you know, the thing that you go up and down on. If you put that toy at the exact right spot and you got on that toy and then got off it, you'd be on the other side of the invisible wall. Stuff like that is what I'm talking about here. Like, you can't do that in Mythic Plus anymore. There's almost we've seen a couple, like the weird gateway skips and stuff over time, but there's not really any exploitative skipping that you can do. So even though I'm talking about exploits, which, you know, in 2019 Metro, I try never to publicize them. Back in the day, it wasn't like that. You know what I mean? Now people exploit combat. Like, they exploit, like, we're going to do something to the boss or mob that's going to make it very easy to deal with, because that's the only way we can deal with it. You know what I mean? And that's because keys get so high now. But back in the day, it was all about time. That was all that ever mattered. So people were exploiting terrain, which was probably worse, but it was less frowned upon because there was no gear and there wasn't an MDI. So anyway, that's what I'm talking about there. But that one is definitely just a terrible tip, because now, I mean, it's the one that's held up the worst, absolutely, because you can't do anything like that anymore. You'd get banned, I think. A lot of the stuff that was done in challenge modes was like, you blink through a wall or something like that. It's like, dude, that's not going to happen in BFA. There's no way they would ever allow that. So let's go ahead and from now on, though, the last three I think are really good, and there's a lot of commentary that I give that I think is really important. So we're going to listen to the whole. This is an interesting pack of trash too, but I don't want to talk about WOD challenge modes, right? Wait, did I miss number 3? I think I did. Yeah, there it is. Okay, here we go.
Is then even further learning every single pull of the dungeon. You need to do this, guys. A lot of people, like, you know, I've done groups recently and they're like, oh, I've never done this dungeon before. It's like, then what the fuck are we doing challenge
This
modes
is actually
for,
a really bad tip as well. But it's actually still important today, because I think there's a lot of people out there who don't understand the basics of the trash, honestly. Like, the trash is not there's some that's challenging, but it doesn't challenge you mechanically a lot until you get to really high levels. And then it becomes really bad. Like, to the point where if you don't have people stunning and interrupting certain casts, you're literally just going to get killed by the mobs. So it's not very good advice for the time, and especially not for a Legion. But what I'm talking about here is not taking any packs off. You know what I mean? You can't take any time off in a challenge mode, because the whole dungeon was the combat. It's not like it is now, where you're going to very distinct. And the bigger difference now in BFA is that there's like mobs that like appear in one part of the dungeon that you never see again. And they're very unique. They're very different. Like, you fight the Sky Screamers in a tall. They're very different than like the flame dudes. I don't know, the augurs. You know what I mean? Completely different type of mob. You know what I mean? Whereas in, you know, even this dungeon, like, you're gonna fight these same pretty much 5 or 6 mob types throughout the entire dungeon. They're gonna be thousands of them. You know what I mean? Over the course of a dungeon. So
I mean, like, this is like doing mythic raiding without ever doing normal. Learn them inside and out. Find ways that you could kind of skip or jump or with CD usage and
so I'm still talking about the stupid
others
wall
do
jumps.
them, but I have maximized my CD usage to a T.
And that, again, I'm talking about maximizing CD usage because it was like scripted. Like, Mythic Plus is so different. Okay, this is where things get interesting. Let's listen.
And number 2 tip I have here, which I think a lot of people don't really understand why this is so important, is stop before bosses to wait, you know, less than 30 seconds, I'd say. Ideally, we'd be waiting 15 to 20. That's kind of like the upper limit. 30 is...
Now think about what I just said there. I just encouraged the group to stop progressing through the dungeon for 20 to 30 seconds. That is how different the game is now. You would never even think about doing that. I mean, maybe some groups do at the upper echelon, but I don't think many do. It's so different now, because things like potions and lining them up with CDs especially was such a big... I'm talking about like 100% DPS increase. If you pull the boss without a pot and without CDs, you would do like half the damage. And there's some other thing. Let's listen to what I have to say.
Pushing it, but never wait longer than that. For CDs to line up on the pull of bosses, okay? Or even really difficult trash pulls. And the reason you want to do this is, especially when you use Lust, when you pop everything on the pull, including, you know, your previously Trinket ICDs, these would be, you know, ticking over in that 20-second window. Weapon enchants as well, which are now gone, but Things like that are going to be ticking over. If you can pop everything on the pull, your burst exponentiates, and that exponentially reduces the time the boss is going to live. So waiting 20 seconds when you can then kill a boss who, would be challenging. So say like the boss took a minute when you just pulled properly and everybody just used their CDs as they came up. The boss lasts a full minute, and he does mechanics that...
Think about that, by the way. I'm talking about the boss lasting a minute as like that's the worst case scenario. A different game.
Aren't something you like can deal with easily, which decreases your DPS. Well, if you just popped everything and killed him in 30 seconds, even though you waited 30 seconds, you have like a much higher % chance of completing.
You understand that? That's actually really important. I think that's probably the best tip I can give. Sometimes it's better to wait. So if you pull the boss at right now, it would take a minute to kill. But if you pull the boss 30 seconds from now, it would take 30 seconds to kill. That's better because you have 0% chance to wipe. What I'm talking about here, I think I explained it.
Because the mechanics that we didn't have to deal with. And of course, everything is just faster for the boss in general. So I don't think a lot of people understand that. And it's going to be even more important now in Legion because you can't reset lust by dying, apparently.
I'm talking about that. How wrong I was there, right? But dude, this is so important in WoD challenge modes. You could reset. You could have lust for every single boss in WoD CMs. And I think if that was in Legion, I think people would do it. I think even if how Legion works now, or BFA works now, where when you die, you lose time, I think people would still do that to get lust for every single fight or every single trash pack or something. There was so many crazy things that you can do to die on purpose in WoD CMs. But yeah, I think this is really interesting. And I don't know if the game really works this way anymore. But like basically in the old days, there was bosses that like, you can literally skip a whole phase of them. I guess maybe there's a boss like that in Shrine or a Siege of Bralis, right? The chick who, whatever, the second boss in Siege of Bralis, I don't know the name. When she jumps away, that's like a 30-second time waster every time she does that. You're not doing any damage to her. So it would be like, okay, so the boss is going to take 2 minutes, whatever, 2.5 minutes if we fight it without CDs, but it's only going to take a minute if we fight it with CDs. So it would be better. I mean, you saved a whole minute there. So, like, feasibly, it's better to just wait 30 plus, like, you could wait up to a minute. You know what I mean? You would want to wait up to a minute because you'd be saving multiple minutes almost. So it's very interesting, and I don't see anybody do it anymore, and I don't know if it's just the way the game works. It's probably just the way the game works. I always I'm too attached to these old topics because I kind of grew up in this culture. Like, even though I was playing the game seriously forever, I grew up, this dungeon culture changed me. It changed who I was in the game. So, I mean, you could see just the UI as well. Like, I've learned so much since then. So I kind of always go back to that. And that's why when people talk about death skips, I'm like, I can't understand how, you know what I mean? Like, compared to the old death skips, quote unquote, like we would die 10, 20 times a dungeon each. You know what I mean? That was how you maximize the dungeon. You would die and reset lust and lust again every 5 minutes, basically. Every time it was available, you would use lust. So you'd use lust like 10 times a dungeon. It was insane. So
I assume that's going into live. It's on the beta currently, but if you die on purpose in a Mythic Plus, you do not get the sated debuff removed.
It's funny because I'm talking about this. It's like, oh, I can't. What are they doing? They're ruining the game because it's like everybody did it. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's an interesting change there, and it's gonna make things even more important. Okay. But the number one tip I can give for an advanced player looking to take dungeons serious, and I'll explain serious, but is to bring the best group you can. So unfortunately, this means that you and your buddies sometimes are not going to be able to play together. You're not going to be able to just walk in together and say, all right, we're good. We're all great friends. We're fast friends. We played together a lot. All as we are is going to be perfect.
Now, this is one thing that I'd love to hear your guys' opinion on, because in the old days, comp was king. Like, it was king. Like I said, I loved Pugging because this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, I had 5 friends who want to do 5-mans, but they all played Rep Pally and Shadow Priest and Feral Druid and just shitty specs, right? Well, back then it was like, if we all did a group together at the time, we had no hope. Like, there was, no matter how good they were scaled down. They were gated by that power scaling. There was nothing they can do to carry. Their class sucked. You know what I mean? So it's different now. because like, you know, we meme about Pharaoh Druid and stuff, but like they can still do really good damage, and they bring something to the group. It's just compared to Bombkin, they bring so much less. Whereas back in the day, it wasn't that way at all. Like if you played a Shadow Priest in Mythic or in challenge modes, you were legit getting carried. Like that was it. Compared to a Frost Mage, you did less than half the damage, and you brought nothing. You brought nothing. You know what I mean? So I don't know if I would still recommend this today, because the game is so different now. A lot of this was said without really realizing how important legendaries and stuff are going to be. I mean, that maybe that's why so many thumbs down, because this is not good advice for tier 1 number 1. Terrible, terrible advice for Legion, especially. It's a lot better in BFA. People continue to say the expansion is not all friendly, but it is 10 times better than Legion, I'm telling you. So, I don't know. Like for me, I still like the concept of having like a guaranteed alt that I'm going to crush on, but it's so important to play that alt like a main. Why bother? Why just, you know what I mean? Like my Death Knight is like, it'd be like, all right, should I play a Brewmaster instead of a Death Knight? Okay. Well, I'm now going to have to play that Brewmaster probably more than I would play my Death Knight. So it's basically like I've swapped mains. It doesn't work that way. In challenge modes, it was different because all you needed was certain gear, and that was it. There was nothing else to worry about, because everything's scaled down, right? So it's like you just needed a baseline of gear that was going to have good stats on it, and that was it. So this was my main alt. This is why I always talk about this concept. I played my Paladin as my main. It was 10 times more geared than this Death Knight. If I ever wanted to raid on this Death Knight, it would be getting carried by like a no small margin. But in 5-mans, I was a god. I mean, look at this, dude. I'm top damage on a boss. This spec was broken. You talking about overpowered specs? Blood Death Knight in challenge modes was the most broken thing ever. I'm telling you, there's nothing. People think Death Knight was strong in Legion. Dude, it's not even freaking close. WoD Death Knight was unbelievable. They could literally solo bosses, and on trash, they would be the top damage. Like, unfreaking believable. Even on bosses. I mean, it's crazy how much damage Blood Boil and your Plagues did. They did, like, more damage than everybody else's actual DPS globals.
That is just unfortunately not a reality in 5-man content, because with only 5 players, all of you need to be making the biggest impact you can make. So on that spectrum, a player, say, pulling more than 100% of their weight, like 150% of their weight, is doing so much more, because 150
is a terrible delivery of my point here. Terrible. I was so bad, dude. Terrible delivery of my point, but hopefully it makes sense.
Times, 1/5 is so much more than 150 times 1/20th, right?
So why I'm bringing this up is because, again, I ran with a lot of raiders, right? Like 5-mans weren't trendy back then. So I ran with people who only knew challenging content as raiding. So they didn't understand that, like, if they didn't do their job to the best possible capability, then they were getting carried. Like, that's just how it was. If you had if you had a Windwalker monk and he wasn't stunning ever, like, you don't need this. You don't need to do this stuff in a raid. You only do it when it's called on you. You know what I mean? It's like, all right, strong Billy, you go ahead, use your interrupt now. You know what I mean? Like in 5-mans, that's not how it works. It has to be a fluid dynamic. So this is still an excellent tip. And I'd still say, what I'm talking about here is very relevant, but I just don't know if it's feasible. I don't know if it is. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, if you want to be a serious Mythic Pluser, but you also play the game seriously besides Mythic Plus, is it worth having just a rogue? Like, okay, I don't want to raid on my rogue. I just want to do Mythic Plus. I don't think that's going to work. You're going to have to do both nowadays. So let me know how you guys feel about this.
Right. So in a raid, it's important that everybody's communicative and coordinated, but one single player cannot carry nearly as hard as in 5-mans. And that's going to make a big deal, because if you got one dude who's kind of slowing you down, then that's it's a much bigger deal. And I'm going to say this now, I think it really helps to have a dungeon alt. And in terms of being serious about Mythic Plus, so in challenge mode, I would say being serious about it, it was 2 levels, was finding everything you can do to make gold as easy as possible for people who are not prepared. Like boosting, I think, is one way to be serious about.
So back in the day, there was no key level, so it was just either you were going for world first times or you were carrying people, and that was it. And I like that better. It would be like if 10 was the highest difficulty, but it was still like maybe like 15 was the highest difficulty. And like, you had to carry your buddy through 15. Like, that was challenging. That was what I loved about challenge mode, because it was like, I can pretty much do about 50% of the tasks here. So I just need somebody else to come in and do another 10%. And then between the four of them, we'd equal 100. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I love challenge modes, because it was very like, it was there. It was every single pull was the exact same every time you did it. Now that's what I love about Mythic Plus, that it's not like that, because it did get boring. But and really the big problem was success was way more, like failure in challenge mode was soul crushing, honestly. Even though you could do it again, it was like, oh, did we really just fail at that when it's been the same? You know, it's the same freaking pull 2 years later. It's not changing any way. It's the did we really just mess it up? It was so bad, so demoralizing. Now in BFA, it's like, oh man, the freaking bolstering necrotic. Oh my, this is crazy. You know what I mean? Like, it changes every single week, so it's good and bad.
Challenge modes in Legion, or in Warlords of Draenor and below. And then the other way is like 5-man coordination, where you're trying to push for world best times, and then that really blurs the line there. So those are two ways to get serious. But in Legion, I would consider being serious about like, you know, EPing, like pushing plus, you know, higher, like 15, 16, 20, 25, etc., as high as you can possibly go. Like, you don't care about the gear at this point.
Now, this is, I don't know why I'm talking about this, because I don't know anything about it at the time. But this is a very interesting thing that just happened. I don't even know what happened there, actually. Oh, yeah, I still have this. Okay, watch this. Watch what happens in game here.
EPing, like pushing plus, you know, higher, like 15, 16, 20, 25, etc.
What kind of idiot am I? I had a freaking bleed on me, and I used an invis pot. I mean, come on, dude. That's embarrassing. We almost lose the key because of this. The time, we almost don't hit gold because of this. I have to now die, and they have to res me, which is not that big of a deal, but I don't know.
High as you can possibly go. Like, you don't care about the gear at this point. You care about the success. And that is being serious about them, because, you know, just completing them for gear is obviously like something that everybody wants to do anyway. It's just like raids. Like, some people raid because they want to get the gear. Like, that's all they care about. Terrible. Is within themselves. So, you know, like, you're playing a rogue.
Listen, this is awesome.
Success within themselves. People raid because they want to be the best they can be, and they want to see success within themselves. So that's going to require you to think outside the box in more ways than one. For example, you know, like, you're playing a rogue in Warlords of Draenor. Well, they're all right. Combat's not.
Dude, this is like the best thing.
You're playing a rogue in Warlords of Draenor. Well, they're all right. Combat's not bad. It's actually pretty good for challenge modes. But guess what? Enhance is 6 times fucking better. So you're gonna roll in. What a freaking game!
What a game! Think about saying that now, dude. Imagine if I said those words right now in front of a live studio audience, what the reaction would be, dude. It would be, oh my god, dude. People would be throwing tomatoes at me. Like, so what I'm saying there is that, you know, no matter how good you are at rogue and what, you were never going to be anywhere near as good, as effective as an enhancement shaman. Now, if you guys don't know anything about enhancement shaman, I can't do it justice. You got to go look at what enhancement shaman was doing in challenge modes. They had that quadratic scaling that everybody goes on about with Unholy DK, and don't forget, this is like Unholy DK basically is the same thing as enhance, but the difference is you don't pull dungeons like you used to. Like, maybe in the MDI people do it, but in regular keys nobody does it. So it's not anywhere near as important. But in the old days, you'd pull, like, you'd regularly fight 20 mobs together. Like, that was not abnormal. So having that quadratic scaling was insane. But more importantly was a trinket called Soul Capacitor. It was a trinket from, I think it was like the 7th boss in, depending on the order, but it was one of the upper tier bosses in Hellfire Citadel. And it basically stored all your damage for a little bit. And then I think it did 150% of that as a burst, like after the trinket expired. So this was tailor made for enhancement shamans in Mythic Plus, or in challenge mode. It was unfreaking believable. What they would do is they would literally one-shot bosses with it. Not even exaggerating, not like the soul, like the dark sim thing. This would actually kill the boss. They would do like crazy. You'd pull like 30 mobs together, pop everything, soul cap, and then like quickly run. Like, you've done like 70% of the soul cap, maximum DPS, and then you run to a boss, and as it's expiring, hit the boss with it, and it would literally one-shot the boss. People actually did this on Tyrant Valari, one of the bosses in Hellfire Citadel, because there's a ton of trash before it. We actually tried it but we weren't anywhere near as good at it. And I think we hit the boss for like 70% of her health. But yeah, there's videos. Go look this up if you're interested. Go look up Enhancement Shaman and WAD and see. Try to find the Tyrant Valari video where somebody actually one-shots a raid boss. It's crazy.
Instead, and you're going to get a full BIS set on that, and that is your dedication. You know, that is you preparing and being ready to play the best you can be. So I think, you know, that kind of shakes people up a bit. They're like, oh, my class isn't good enough for 5-mans. Well, yeah, now you've been given more affordability here with the removal of like group-wide buffs. The comp is a little bit less important, but you're still going to need a lust, and you're still going to need 3 fucking heavy hitters.
I was so
as
wrong.
Much AoE and then burst damage as possible. So thanks for sticking along for this whole one. It's been
wow, was I so wrong saying that, dude? That is so crazy how wrong, how backwards that. This is why you got to revise, man, because, dude, was I so freaking... That's the complete opposite. Don't take that advice, man. You know what I mean? That was terrible advice there. But anyway, it still begs the question. Like, if you're serious about Mythic Plus, you might have to switch mains. You're not going to have an alt that's going to be... You're not going to be able to play 2 characters and have them both efficacy, like, at the same level. If you want to play a Prot Warrior, you're going to have to switch to it. You're going to have to get all the stuff for it. You're going to have to play it seriously now in BFA. Maybe in 9.0 would be different, but I don't know. So let me know what you guys think. I hope this has helped people at least as much as the videos that me and Cop have been making, because I think that these tips are something that a lot of people just don't understand. So whether or not you understand the dungeons, that's a whole different story. That's why we're making those videos. But this is like universal. Like, no matter what dungeon you do, this is important information. This is information that you should understand before you even start thinking about the dungeons. You know, these are, like I said, not all of them have held up well, but I hope that my commentary on top of those have done well. So yeah, check the video out. There's also a follow-up video that I made which shows some of these examples in live action. And that was frankly me just trying to capitalize on the viewership. But it should help too. So thanks for watching. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next one.